This video was brought to you by War Thunder. More details to come soon. Earlier this year, I did a bunch of Mega Man videos covering the classic series, and I left off at Mega Man and Base back in June. While many in the comments are excited to see me cover Mega Man's 9, 10, and 11, I've got a lot of classic Mega Man games I'd like to cover before we even get into any of that. Today's video is on Mega Man the Wily Wars for the Sega Genesis, so let's get into it. Mega Man the Wily Wars is a fascinating game because of how it's a full-on remaster of Mega Man's 1 through 3 from the original Nintendo, just now on the Sega Genesis. Remastering one-generation-old games is a practice people have grown to really dislike in the last 10 years or so, but it's interesting to see that the origins of the video game remaster go back decades. Back then, taking an NES game like Mega Man or Mario and overhauling them on new consoles just a couple years later was a huge leap in graphics and sound quality and all that good stuff. Part of what made this an interesting release was how it got published. Mega Man was always owned by Capcom, but it was definitely associated with Nintendo. The first 6 games were all NES games, and then the Mega Man X series was only on Super Nintendo. Capcom and Sega working together for Mega Man was seen as a pretty big deal. This artwork was drawn by Greg Martin to celebrate the collaboration. He's responsible for countless iconic VHS and old video game box art. But, while I've defended his rendition of Sonic a plethora of times in the past, this is definitely one of the most cursed depictions of classic Mega Man I've ever seen, and that's a pretty high bar. But anyway, what came of this was the Wily Wars remade trilogy on Genesis and a new game for the Sega Game Gear. But I've never played that, so we'll have to revisit the subject in a soon-to-be-released video. The Wily Wars got a normal physical release in Europe and Japan, but in America, the game was not published in stores. It was instead released as a part of the Sega Channel service, a pay-to-play system where you could get access to games and demos and stuff like that. Think of it like streaming, long before streaming. You'd pay, you'd plug the adapter into the console and the television, and then had access to the service. For the longest time, this was the only official way to play these remakes in the US. Which is funny because US box art got drawn for the game, it just never got released. Oh my goodness! Yeah, you can, add that to the list of disturbing classic Mega Man poses. Nowadays, the game has seen some more love in the West. It was included with the Sega Genesis Mini console a few years back, it got a reissue limited release cartridge, and is also on the Switch as a part of its streaming service. I own a reproduction card of this that I got at a convention like 10 years ago, but it's the PAL region game, so it runs a lot slower than an NTSC game. But these new versions correct this problem. But I've never played this all the way through before. I've sampled it here and there over the years, but I never sat down and beat all 3 games because I was always content playing them on the NES. Today is finally my chance to give the remakes a whirl. So let's start with Mega Man 1. Before you get into the game, it's important to visit the options menu. The Genesis controller normally has 3 big buttons, unlike the NES's 2, so you're going to want to configure what buttons you'd like to have shoot and jump and all that. Upon starting, you get this fancy save select screen. You get 3 save files, which will track your progress across all 3 games. That's nothing noteworthy in 2024, but back in 1994, some games had this and some didn't. Mega Man 1 had no save system, and 2 and 3 used passwords, so this is definitely an improvement. Once you get into the games, Mega Man 1 has seen a lot of cosmetic enhancements. The title screen is based on the Japanese original where Mega Man is posing in front of a blue background, now with the Mega Man 3 opening theme as background music, unlike the original game where there was no music. The stage select in Mega Man 1 didn't have portraits for the bosses like all the sequels did, the sprites just stood in a box. But now, the stage select screen has been redone to match the later entries, and then all the levels have been overhauled to be far more detailed. This is most noticeable in Mega Man 1 because of the fact that this game looked the least detailed of all. Every Mega Man 1 stage had solid color background, many of which were just black voids of nothing. Fireman stage now has a rocky background with a heat wave effect. You can tell this stage takes place in some kind of underground magma facility rather than just a stage in a video game. Similarly, Cutman's level also takes place inside of a facility with indoor and outdoor sections and windows that show what's outside. When you go outside in Elecman's stage, there will be clouds flying by. It doesn't always look great. The background in Wily Castle 2 kinda looks like a baby's wallpaper, but I see the vision. The artists behind Mega Man 1 weren't as experienced making backgrounds when they made the game originally, and it was the first game in the series, on what was already limiting hardware. The Genesis allowed them to go back and give it a makeover, and for the most part, I like how it turned out. Except Roll and Dr. Light in the ending, they look really weird. Mega Man, the bosses, and Wily look fine throughout the collection, but I think these new sprites for Light and Roll were adapting the original sprites too closely, where he looked a lot more regular and proportional in Mega Man 7, for example. Otherwise, it's Mega Man 1. The remaster doesn't bring in features from later games like the slide or charging your buster. It's a faithful rendition of the game when looking at the mechanics. I used the same boss order as I did on the NES and had the same experience as always. But the Genesis version does fix minor bugs and issues with it though. On the NES, Mega Man had like 2 tons of cement strapped to his feet and would plummet into the abyss at a decidedly unsafe rate. This made certain platforming segments a nightmare. However, this problem was fixed for the Wily Wars, so Mega Man is much easier to control during platforming sequences. The pause glitch also doesn't work in this, where you could just do continuous damage to a boss by pausing and unpausing the game. So for the first time in my life, I actually beat the Yellow Devil in Wily Castle 1 completely legit. Goody for me. While I was able to beat the Yellow Devil this time, I can say that the fight against Cutman royally kicked my keister into next Tuesday. He just does a lot of damage on contact, and your Mega Buster pellets feel really slow in this, and they do a lot less damage on him specifically. And you can't use his weakness on him in the refight since the blocks for the super arm aren't in the room. But besides that, the Mega Man 1 experience felt pretty similar to the original, just with prettier visuals. Which means we can now move on to Mega Man 2. But before I even think of getting into any of that, we've got to talk about War Thunder, the sponsor of today's video. War Thunder is the most all-encompassing vehicular combat game that the gaming industry has yet seen, and it is available now on PC and consoles for free. Players can control over 2,500 planes, tanks, ships, and helicopters from many major countries, ranging from the biplanes of the early 20th century to the fighter jets and tanks of today. Every vehicle is super well modeled and detailed down to the last component, with a comprehensive damage system for each one. And you can also fully customize your gear too for increased player choice. The game has detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sounds that make it an incredibly immersive experience for all players. Today, you can join over 70 million of those players in PvP battles and experience all the game has to offer. It even comes with different modes for different kinds of players, like arcade mode for those who like fast-paced matches and simple physics, and then there's realistic mode, which is a balance between intense gameplay and authentic controls, and the simulator mode is the most difficult one. So, if you're interested, which I know you are, you're going to want to mosey on over to the link in the description and or the pinned comment to get in on the action. The game is, I remind, entirely free and is on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox. If you use my link to sign up, you'll get the massive bonus pack rewarded to new and returning players that haven't played in 6 months. With it, you get a selection of premium vehicles and the exclusive vehicle decorator, the Eagle of Valor, with 100,000 silver lions and a 7-day-long premium account. Available for a limited time only. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Something to note off the bat with Mega Man 2 is how it only uses the Japanese difficulty. In English, Mega Man 2 has a normal mode and a hard mode. Hard mode was the Japanese original, and normal mode was an easier version they added for the international release. It's quite funny how much easier Mega Man 2 gets when playing on normal, though. You can just shred through bosses with their weaknesses in no time. It's very comedic. But the Japanese version is how the difficulty balance of Mega Man 2 was intended to be, and it's how the Wily Wars makes you play the game. It's really not even that much harder, especially in stages. It's just about how much damage bosses take. But this does present one problem with playing on Genesis. I feel like Mega Man's attacks are all a lot slower, and I was just going into that a second ago, but this goes for anything like Buster Pellets or special weapons. They felt a lot less quick on the draw than the NES original, so I definitely got my ass kicked more in this version than I did playing hard mode on NES. The games gave bosses and enemies more iframes too, which further increased the difficulty. But then I also thought that slowdown was an issue across all 3 games. The game would just start chugging at various moments. I'm not saying the NES versions didn't have slowdown, but I think the pace of the game just felt slower across the board. As Mega Man 2 makes changes to bosses that make them tougher to beat, like Woodman being taller so his attacks are harder to dodge, and combining that with him taking less damage because of it being the original Japanese damage values, and you just have a tougher game on your hands. With bugs removed from the OG game, like using the pause menu to reset the metal blades, effectively giving you infinite ammo. So, like I said, it's tougher all around. Something players might take issue with is the music. Mega Man 2 is one of the most iconic soundtracks in the whole NES era, and now all 3 games have Genesis-styled music. The composition is the same, so I was still humming along with my playthroughs of Mega Man 2 and 3, but the music definitely sounded better to me on NES. Some Genesis games have great soundtracks, but this one definitely has those Genesis-sounding instruments you either love or hate. I'm indifferent, but music is in the ears of the beholder. Despite the fact that there are many minor changes to all these games, Mega Man 2 is still solid here. I think the backgrounds added to the stages give them more depth, like I said about Mega Man 1. I had more difficulty getting through Wily Wars 2 than the original, but not to a degree where I think the game is less enjoyable or anything. It's still Mega Man 2 at the core of it. It's not a bad way to play the game by any means, so I'd consider this another solid remaster. Mega Man 3 was a slightly different story. Mega Man 3 is a game that I like. I said as much in my video on it. I think the game is good and comes with improvements like increasing climbing speed and better visuals and the sliding mechanic that became a core move for Mega Man in all the following games. It's a very significant game in the history of Mega Man for sure, but the game just has these issues that drag the experience down in major and minor ways that I don't think 1 and 2 did. Things a remaster could fix, but this one doesn't. This is a nitpick, but I think Mega Man 3 being rushed was something you could see from the minute you start the game. Mega Man 2 had a whole intro cutscene that Wily Wars still has in there, but Mega Man 3 just started with a blank void title screen, which was especially odd given how Mega Man 3 had a more involved story than either of the previous games, but players could only ever really know that if they read the manual. A new intro cutscene might have been cool, and then Mega Man 3 had this shitty-ass menu screen. In all the NES Mega Man games, you could only access your weapons and items by pausing the game. Mega Man 1 fit all the tools in a single list, and Mega Man 2 had 2 pages, but they were easy to switch between. But then, switching weapons in Mega Man 3 was done with this menu that would pull up from the bottom of the screen, and switching tools always felt super slow in this. And that is still a fact in the Wily Wars. I was gonna say maybe they didn't have the ability to overhaul the menu design, but that's not true. When you beat all 3 games, you unlock the Wily Tower mode, which brings over the menu screen from Mega Man's 4 through 6. Giving the first 3 games a simplified menu like this would have been nice for sure, but alas, that's not the case. Also, because there are no passwords in the Wily Wars, you have to play the Doc Robot levels to reach the end of the game, but honestly, playing them again for the video, they aren't so bad. Some parts can be kind of cruel, like if you die in the part that requires the rush jet and then you have to see that the ammo refills are gone if you already grabbed them before, but for the most part, it's doable. I had little stylistic choices I didn't like with this version of Mega Man 3, like the background and Top Man stage. The OG Mega Man 3 was more detailed than the previous games, so the changes aren't an automatic improvement like previous ones. In the case of Top Man stage, you could see the blue sky outdoors, and in the foreground there was glass that held grass inside of it. I liked how this one part with Spike showed that the glass was broken. That was a nice detail for an NES game. Now the level is in an enclosed space, and some of those details aren't really there anymore. Now, that was merely my interpretation of the original level not being adhered to, so it's just a me thing, but I'm just saying that when the original visuals had more definition to them, alterations become more open to scrutiny than the other games. And then there was this weird little bug where the magnet weapon felt like it wasn't aiming at targets properly, but besides that, if you liked Mega Man 3 as it was, this is still that game, barring any new tiny glitches or issues. You're still in store for a super easy-ass endgame though, stocked full of E-tanks and a pitiful final boss. But Mega Man 3 is a fun game. I like it, and I still do in this version. As I mentioned a moment ago, by beating all 3 games you unlock a new mode called Wily Tower, and this was pretty interesting. In it, Mega Man has to play through 3 levels in a brief fortress segment, complete with all new level design, and to get through it, you get to pick 8 weapons and a few items from any of the 3 Mega Man games and hope for the best. Obviously, I grabbed great ones like the Thunder Beam from Mega Man 1, the Metal Blades from Mega Man 2, and the Search Snake from Mega Man 3. Luckily, I looked up a damage chart to know what weapons I needed to bring for bosses, because otherwise I'd have never equipped the Hyper Bomb or the Hard Knuckle, but those are a couple of bosses' weaknesses. I think Wily Tower is a pretty cool mode. The customization you're allowed to do with it is really fun, and I wish more Mega Man games had something like it. It's like if X Challenge from the Legacy Collection came with new levels and bosses. The new visuals for these stages look great, the music sounds good, and it doesn't have a boss rush at the end. What a relief. But if you haven't played Wily Tower because you've never played this collection at all, I wouldn't say you need to drop everything to play it, especially because you have to beat all 3 games to unlock it. Wily Tower is cool and unique, but it's not that long. It's shorter than all 3 of the games the collection comes with. So I enjoyed it, but I doubt I'll be rushing to play it again because it still feels slow like the main games do. And that's my thing with the Wily Wars. Now that I've finally played these 16-bit versions of the classic trilogy, I can't imagine myself coming back to them much. It's a cool piece of history, and I think the remasters are good all around. I thought this was a good game to play, and I think anyone who likes Mega Man's 1, 2, and 3 will like this, because I like those games, and I like this version as well. But it's not really a must-play. The games aren't really enhanced in a way that makes the NES versions obsolete, and the new mode is cool, just not a must-play. So if you want to experience a neat piece of gaming remaster history and happen to have a Switch Online account, Wily Wars is a cool game, but if you've played these games before, you aren't missing anything just sticking with the Legacy Collection versions. But one thing that's pretty exciting is that while Mega Man's 4 through 6 never got Genesis remakes, there is a fan team working on such a thing right now. It's called Mega Man The Sequel Wars. The demos have released Mega Man 4 and 5, but Mega Man 6 is on the way, so I'm very much looking forward to playing that game, because I think it'll be pretty cool to see those games back again with 16-bit graphics, because I always thought 4, 5, and 6 were better than the first 3. So when that comes out, I'll give it a review for sure, but in the meantime, that's about all the time we have for today. That's just my brief thoughts on Mega Man The Wily Wars. Next up is going to be my thoughts on the Mega Man games released for the Nintendo Game Boy. So I hope everyone's looking forward to that. And once more, before we go, I'd like to thank War Thunder for sponsoring this video. The game is free, and using my link, you'll get access to a bunch of super cool bonus unlockables that are only available for a limited time only, so you'd best get on it. But now I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.